Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this Thursday evening. It is 6:05 p.m. in Napa, California. We have been experiencing an unseasonable heat wave. It's been over 100 degrees Fahrenheit the last several days, but I do think it will be cooling off soon. Thank you for being on time. I expect that more folks will be joining us soon as the hour goes on, and if not, 50 is already pretty good. Let's do some housekeeping stuff at the top before I get into responding to your questions, which I hope you have for me. These sessions would be really boring without your questions, so I'm counting on you for your support in that regard. So personally, I had a birthday the other day on Tuesday, October 1st. I celebrated my 42nd birthday, and I had a really nice day. And a lot of people reached out and wished me well, and I had a very nice dinner. I got to do some of my work. In many respects, my birthday was kind of like a normal day because I really like my normal days. So I saw some clients. I went to the gym. I talked to the people that I cared about and got to spend the night just relaxing. So just wanted to tell you about that. The purpose of this chat, I think it will be my final one dedicated specifically to discussing my book, The Value of Others. It came out almost 3 months ago. It's incredible that it's already been that long. It's still performing very well. It's in the top 10 on Amazon internationally in a number of important categories like dating and relationships and marriage and long-term relationships. That's incredible. The fact that I do not have a manager, I do not have an agent, I do not have a publishing house, I do not spend any money on advertising, and a man in his house can write a book that reaches this scope is amazing. Like this, the internet and what it can now accomplish will continue to disrupt a great number of industries. It's still selling very well thanks to your support and word of mouth referrals, because that's really how this works in the absence of a publicist and a marketing campaign. And I'm really pleased with the feedback that I have received thus far. That said, I can appreciate that it's not always the easiest book to understand. I wrote this book in a different tone than I use on the YouTube channel. YouTube channel is kind of informal. It's casual. It's 8 minutes, and then you move on to the next thing. This book, I hope, will still be relevant 100 years from now. This is like my bid for continued relevance long after I'm gone. And it might need to be wrestled with a little bit or reread. It's not something that was hastily dashed out to capitalize on a little internet fame. It's something that I hope will have a long-lasting influence in the field and potentially change how people approach their relationships moving forward. Maggie, the substitute teacher. Hi, Maggie. Nice to see you. Happy belated birthday. I love the audiobook. The audiobook was so much fun to record. I got to record it myself. One of the things I wanted to be when I was in my early 20s was a book narrator. I actually had a girlfriend who did that for a living. She recorded children's books, and I thought that was just the coolest, best job in the world. I tried so hard to get a gig there, but for whatever reason, I wasn't able to do it. So with this audiobook, I was able to sort of fulfill a dream of mine. I just had to write the book myself, I guess. It was also a lot of fun. I recorded it in about 4 days. And I think at that time, it was also unseasonably hot. It was about 110 degrees. And I had to turn the fans off in the little dark room that I was recording in. So I was actually recording in my underwear with the shades drawn in the dark with kind of sweat pouring down just to try to stay cool and get the job done. but I had a great time recording it. Thank you. I'm glad that you had a nice time listening to it. So the super chats are already starting to come in. Please have patience with me. This is only the third time I'm doing this. I think I'm getting the hang of it. If I miss you for some reason, please do not take it personally. I will do my best to get to everybody. Thank you for your support. So we're here to talk about the book, The Value of Others. If you have questions relative to any of the themes or subjects that exist in the book, I'd be happy to discuss them as a priority. And then I'm going to save some time near the end to share with you like what's going to happen next, because I actually have a couple of big things coming down the pipeline that I'm excited to share with you. Okay, so people are joining us, which is great. And let's get to your questions. Okay, let's make sure that I don't screw this up like I have in the past. Okay, we already heard from Maggie. Thank you. Next up is Tan Lee. Thank you for your donation. I'm a 5'5", 32-year-old Asian male earning 120K in Melbourne. I'm currently focusing on building a business, fitness, and fashion. Sounds like you're doing great, man. What else should I be working on to become husband material and experience optionality at 35 despite my race and height? So first of all, there's a bit of just maybe some internal work that needs to be done there. I appreciate that race affects dating. Like there's been some really interesting studies that were done using OkCupid data. OkCupid is a big conglomeration that owns like 90% of dating apps, including OkCupid, Hinge, Tinder, etc. So it's actually a pretty robust evidence pool. And they did show that there are intersections on preference between the various races and genders. So let's not pretend that race doesn't influence people's perceptions when it comes to sexual selection and mate choice. That said, I guarantee that there are women out there who are into shorter Asian men. Like I guarantee it. They may not be where you currently are. They may. I mean, Melbourne is a big city, so there's probably going to be some women who are into shorter Asian men in that city. But if not, then you got to go where the fish are. You know what I'm saying? So it's like if you're not having luck where you are and you suspect it might be due to your race, then geo arbitrage, man. It's like welcome to 2024 in the sexual marketplace. It's one big pond. So go to where you are more highly valued and more highly appreciated. I would also potentially refer you to that article. I'm sure you can Google it to find out, well, which races of women swipe right on Asian men the most. And those are going to be kind of like your customers. And hopefully there is an overlap between what you want and what's attractive to you, and who is attracted to you. Okay. So I addressed that. What else should I be working on to become husband material? The best thing that you could do in the next several years is to practice. So most guys don't just want to get married, just like most women don't just want to get married, despite what some guys might think. They want to be married to someone that they like and someone that they're attracted to and someone that they feel like lucky to be with. And those people don't come around every day. You know, there's billions and billions of people in the world, but the ones that you really like and that really light you up, they don't come around every day, right? So you have to be ready for them. It's like if you don't get any batting practice in, how are you going to hit it out of the park when the pressure's on? That is, when you're actually confronted with a really attractive option, right? If you're just sort of like waiting out of the game until the bases are loaded in the bottom of the ninth, because that's when it really matters, I don't think you're going to be as effective as you might like. So I talk about this. I made an episode a long time ago called The Two Kinds of Dates. And I learned this from my dad. And he taught me that, Orion, there are two kinds of dates. There are good dates and there are practice for good dates. That's it. So in the absence of a optionality that really excites you and lights you up, you need to practice on the women that are available and that are showing some interest in dating you. I know that can rub some folks the wrong way, but how else are men supposed to be confident and competent about directing a relationship if they don't have any experience dating? and seducing and moving in that direction. So I would say you got to get some reps in so that you can be prepared to hit it out of the park when you get your pitch. Okay, hope that helps. Tiffany Longboat, thank you for your donation. Canadian 149. I'll put that as a down payment on a soda. Thank you. Luke Casley 20. Thank you for your support. I agree the audiobook was easy to listen to while working out or cleaning the house. I'm glad to hear that. I'm also a little surprised. I kind of thought that the book might be something that would require undivided attention. Maybe you're just really intelligent and can split your consciousness and focus on multiple things at once, because I sometimes get lost listening to my own audiobook. Hector P., thank you for your donation. Thank you. Kaka, okay. Where did you go? $10 Canadian. Thank you with your little workout emoji. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Voodoo 2130. Thank you for your donation. Good day, Orion, or good day, since I assume that's Australian. Orion, can the role of the adorer and the adored be switched in a romantic relationship at any point? It absolutely can. If so, what are the pros and cons of that switch? Thanks. Okay, so it can switch, but it generally requires a major life or relationship event. So in the beginning, when people are getting to know each other in the initial stages of the courtship process, they're kind of feeling out who they are, and they're negotiating unconsciously and behaviorally, and there can be bigger swings with respect to the balance of attraction. Maybe one week the woman is pursuing and the next week the man is pursuing, and I'm not sure about that. That one date didn't go so well, so do I give up or do I stick it out? So there's a lot of swings that happen in the beginning. As a relationship progresses, people pretty much settle into roles, and they kind of stick it out, mostly because each person is, in most cases, they settle into their preferred role, and they kind of negotiate a preferred gap between the two of them. And that's kind of what allows the relationship to endure. Now, if for whatever reason, it would be hard to provoke a shift in the balance of attraction. It would definitely destabilize the relationship, which would probably jeopardize the the maintenance of it. It would put it at risk, because some people just do not want to be in the other role. And if you manipulate the relationship in such a way to more or less force them into that role, they might become so dissatisfied with the relationship that it's no longer worth it. So you should be cautious about fiddling with that. But the roles do switch, but it's usually when there's a great positive thing that happens or a big negative thing that happens to one of the persons in the relationship and not the other. So for example, a positive thing that could happen is maybe somebody in the adorer role, who never really thought much of himself, suddenly gets a huge promotion or becomes internet famous and is now making 10 times the money that he made before and is now awash in sexual optionality. It might not happen overnight, but that person is probably eventually going to shift into more the adored role, because the balance of power has shifted in that relationship. By the same token, a big negative thing that could happen could be an affair, where the trust and the attraction is fundamentally broken. And that can cause sometimes a fall from grace. The adored can no longer be on his or her pedestal because of the indiscretion. And then the adorer can no longer see the adored with that kind of positive moony eyes, for instance. So it can switch, but it generally requires a pretty big change that affects only one of the partners. Okay, Maldridge, thank you for your donation. How would you apply your principles in a society that is continually moving towards gender equality? Are the theories compatible? Thank you, great book. Yeah, I don't think that gender equality is incompatible with the things that I talk about. but we have to be clear about what we're talking about when we say gender equality, because there's lots of different ways that we can define that. Like logically or mathematically, equality means the same. Like when we say 1 + 2 = 3, we're saying that 3 is the same thing as 1 and 2 together. And that's why we can like swap out those terms in a mathematical statement and everything still is true. We can swap out the term 3 for 1 + 2 in parentheses and everything will work, because 1 + 2 is the same as 3. And sometimes people approach gender dynamics in that sense, that men and women are the same. And that's not true, because you certainly can't just swap out a man with a woman and expect everything else to be the same. Gender obviously influences a great number of relationship dynamics. Most notably, people get into sexual relationships generally with one gender and not the other, right? So if suddenly your wife was replaced by a man, I think that you would notice, right? So that's potentially a very literal, but also a very logical definition of equality. I think the way that most well-meaning liberals approach equality is correct, which is that equality in the genders is equality of opportunity, and that there shouldn't necessarily be things socially that men are allowed to do and women are not, and vice versa, and that men and women should be treated equally under the law. Otherwise, what we're really talking about is some form of discrimination, and that would be a form of political suicide, even though there are some political movements that are masquerading as other things that might actually be discriminating against one gender or the other. So one of the issues that I don't think I talk about in the book, because it has more to do with masculinity and femininity, which are not the same as like biological sex. Men have masculinity and femininity inside of them. Women have masculinity and femininity inside of them. And what seems to attract is that kind of polarity. Like really masculine folks of both genders tend to attract very feminine folks of the gender of their sexual preference, right? You see this even in same-sex relationships, where one partner seems to be much more masculine and the other one seems to be much more feminine. Whereas as the sexes kind of converge, we see that matching as well. Like when a guy isn't too masculine, he generally ends up with a woman who isn't too feminine, or a man who's a little bit feminine ends up with a woman who's a little bit masculine. Like on some level, the intensity is sort of matched with respect to their gender expression. And that's something to keep in mind. So like, if you're not catching the fish you would like to eat, you might need to change your bait. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, where on the gender expression spectrum are the folks that you want to attract? If you're a man, for instance, who's interested in attracting more traditionally feminine women, you might have more luck if you express yourself in more traditionally masculine ways, because they tend to attract based on like intensity of that polarity. Hopefully that made sense. Good question. Byron Injali, thank you for your support. Dr. Orion, what are some practical ways for men captains to maintain frame order within their relationships on their ships, boats? Yeah. This is the subject of an upcoming video where I talk about the 3 phases of relationships. The 3 phases of relationships obviously are discussed in the book. They are attraction, negotiation, and maintenance. One thing that I failed to mention in the book that I correct in the video is that a relationship phase, once initiated, never terminates. Like, for example, if you succeed in attraction, your reward is you get to start negotiation. But that does not mean that you get to stop attraction. You never get to stop attraction for the rest of that relationship, because stopping that will jeopardize the basis of that relationship, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. By the same token, if you successfully negotiate and secure a relationship, your reward is you get to start maintaining. But that doesn't mean that you get to stop negotiating. And that's what's really this question is about. Very few relationships are explicitly negotiated. Like the closest that usually comes in heterosexual relationships is the define the relationship talk, where both people kind of pretend to understand what they mean by monogamous. And after that, or like, you say your marriage vows once and that's it. Like, this is the terms of our relationship and we don't need to revisit that. And on some level, that makes sense. It's like a contract once signed is like indefinitely enforceable until, the termination date in the contract or the death of the participants or whatever comes sooner, I suppose. But that's not really how relationships work, because relationships aren't really about that dischargement of responsibility. It's a part of it, but people aren't going to approach their romantic relationships exactly like they approach their jobs, for better or for worse. So the truth is that it's not that relationships are negotiated once and then that's the structure of the relationship henceforth. Relationships are actually constantly being renegotiated throughout the duration of the relationship. But they're not usually renegotiated with words. Your partner doesn't come to you in most cases and say, I want a change in this type of relationship. Generally, what happens is that people just start showing up in the relationship in different ways. Some of this is just organic and inevitable because people are always in the process of becoming who they are. People are always changing. They can't not. If you're not changing, you're dead. So some of this is natural and, let's say, unconscious. Some of this might be intentional and conscious. But your partner is going to start showing up differently. Now, how you respond, and some of those ways that they show up differently, some of them you're going to like, and some of them you're not going to like so much, right? And what we're talking about here about maintaining frame is your partner starts showing up in ways that you don't like so much. Now, this change gets renegotiated based on how you respond to how your partner is now showing up differently. So here's a very concrete and common example. In the beginning of a relationship, a woman is very sexual, for example, and they're having sex several times a week. She loves it, seems to have a very high libido, etc. Now fast forward 5 years into the relationship, and the guy's kind of lucky to get it once a quarter. Like, how did that happen? Like, over time, I'm sure the man continued to make bids that were more frequently rejected. That would be the change in behavior. Or there was just longer periods of time between intercourses, right? And if the guy doesn't really say anything and just sort of like accepts that this is the new status quo, then the relationship has functionally been renegotiated, right? And this is unfortunate because it all happened kind of tacitly and non-verbally. And there's also kind of plausible deniability there. Like maybe she really isn't feeling well, or that she's been under a lot of stress, things like that. So this is how relationships get renegotiated. And captains sort of call that out, and they don't accept changes in the relationship that they're not comfortable tolerating. Like, it's hard I do consultations every week with guys who are in sexless marriages, and the kind of like shame and the rage and the frustration and the despair and the pain that come from that, like it's very difficult for them. But they are at least somewhat complicit because like a relationship doesn't become sexless overnight, and that guy just continued to sort of go along with it, right? So that's kind of how frame gets seeded in relationships, is the partner shows up different and we just sort of go along with it. So one of the easiest ways to do that, like a first level response, if you can, is to joke about it. And that's a way of kind of like bringing it into the conscious dialogue, but without showing that, or taking it too seriously, or that I'm offended or hurt by the change in behavior. That would be maybe like a level 1. It might go down to like a level 10, and a level 10 is like explicitly addressing the change and giving the other person a choice between that behavior or a continued relationship with you. And and to try to do that without any kind of petulance or anger or hurt, which can be hard to do, and respect that person's choice. Some people are going to choose the behavior over a relationship with you, and some people are going to see, oh, you know what? I'm willing to give this up I'm willing to sacrifice this behavior to keep a valued relationship. So that's what I would say to that. Good question. Gustavo Parra, thank you for your donation, sir. Amazing work. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I lost my place here. Here we go. XAU CAD Trader, Canadian 10. Thank you for your support. Happy birthday, Dr. Taraban. Thanks. Your book is one of my favorite reads ever. Thank you. Psy, question for you. What psych literature courses would you recommend for improving self-esteem and social skills for dating? I don't know many. I will say that my favorite book on dating, until I wrote my book, was Mark Manson's Models. That is an excellent book. He wrote it before he became famous with The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Apparently, back in the day, he was something of a pickup artist, and he kind of made a living as a dating coach, like Hitch, in the Boston area in his 20s. And he learned a lot of seduction techniques and taught them to other men. And this book is basically him kind of saying, here's the accumulation of my knowledge in this field, and I'm going to move on to other things. And it's a great book. And he touches on a lot of different things. Its core premise is the successful seduction is based on vulnerability, which is a complicated word, which I think that he admits. Being vulnerable basically means like being willing to share and express your authentic emotion. And he goes into a lot of practical things to consider, from everything that you look, your dress, to some things you might say to increase sexual tension. It's a good read. Check it out. I would also recommend the channel The Naturals Lifestyle. I've had Alex Leon, who's one of their coaches, on the channel in the past. Their big kind of flagship dude is James Marshall. And that channel has, I think, 4 or 5 guys. They all have their own energies and personalities, and they all seem to be really good. And I like that, because sometimes we fall prey to thinking that there's one right way to be a man, or one right way to seduce a woman, and that's not true. There's lots of different ways to do it, and these guys do it without being creepy. And I would highly recommend you check out their channel. Social skills for dating. I made a newsletter about this. The best thing to do for improving social skills for dating is dating. The second best thing, like I was talking about a few minutes ago, practice. The second best thing is improv classes. Improv will help you to get out of your head, which is generally your enemy when it comes to social interactions. On some level, you have to open your mouth without really knowing what you're going to say, and trust that you're going to be able to complete the sentence in an intelligible way. Like if you're trying to think out in full everything that you're going to say before you say it, you're going to be so locked into your own mind. You're going to be so rigid and inflexible. It's going to be very hard to play. And that's generally what banter is. It's like a form of verbal tennis, and you have to be able to hit the ball back and forth. If you're like playing chess 50 moves out before you even make your opening move, it's unlikely to progress the way that you imagine. So improv is about like making choices before you're ready and trusting that you'll be able to work with them. A really useful skill set. It can feel kind of funny, but that might mean that you're just like getting out from behind your social reticence or your social fear. So that's what I would recommend. Charles D, New Zealand, 10. Thank you for donation. Kiwi, you mentioned an emerging gig economy. Yeah, e.g. Tinder TaskRabbit versus husband, prostitute, cleaner versus wife. I think I understand what you're talking about, because I mentioned Tinder and TaskRabbit in the book. What are some other less obvious gig roles you foresee, and what are the trade-offs of using them? What's interesting is like the way I talk about the future of relationships in the 12th chapter of the book can seem super progressive and scary. Like, because I'm basically talking about not the complete elimination of marriage and traditional relationships, but the continued diminution of those institutions. Like, we're seeing them fall apart in real time. It's been a decimation over the last 50 years. And with dating apps, it seems like it's just getting worse in many respects. And so sometimes people hear my prognostications for the future, and they think, oh, this guy, he's so cynical, or he's so far out there, and we need to return to like a traditional modality. This idea of the gig relationship is actually more aligned with really traditional marriage and relationships. Not traditional in the 1950s ideal stainless steel toaster, tradcon fantasy. I mean, like when we lived in villages in the medieval period and for thousands of years previous to that. When we lived in villages and we had extended kin networks, we had 100 people within a mile of us who we knew. Like, it wasn't just, oh, I think I saw that guy at the post office. Like, you know these people, you know their name, you know their story, you've eaten with them, you see them in church or a temple or whatever form of worship at the community rituals, and you go to different people for different things. Like, you go to that person for advice, and you go to that person to like have fun with, and you go to that person if you want to gossip, and you go to that person if you need help with your crops. You need that person to trade for the things that you make. It's like, that's a gig economy, and that's how human beings have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And what we did is we changed all that about 100 years ago. The first real change was the huge advent of the love marriage, where we conflated two of those gigs, which is spouse and mistress. And those were very separate roles for the vast majority of human history. You did not expect your wife, your spouse, the person with whom you're basically forming a small business with to raise children, to also be your passionate romantic lover. That's nuts. It was just sort of like, people had different tolerances and accommodations to those realities, but they were almost never the same person. But now they're the same person. We're supposed to have like I talk about, the love marriage might be a paradox in terms. But then we get rid of the communities and we get rid of the extended kin networks, and now we need advice. So this person needs to be our therapist. And then we need fun. So this person needs to be our buddy. And we don't live with our parents anymore, so we need this person to be our mommy or our daddy, and all this instrumental support. And it just becomes too much. And this has gotten to a fever pitch in the last 4 years, where people aren't even like leaving their houses anymore. It's like, men and women were never really designed to spend all that much time with each other. Like, that's not what you see in traditional living. Like, the men generally spend their days hanging out with other men, and the women generally spend more time hanging out with other women. And nowadays, not only are men and women spending a lot of time together, but they're spending time with like one particular man and one particular woman. They don't even go into the office anymore. So now they're working at home. They never fucking leave, right? So, like, to give you the way that a lot of modern couples live, it almost sounds like an experiment that NASA would do to determine if like their two astronauts were mentally resilient enough to go to Mars without killing each other. Because we're just going to like put them in this little capsule for a year and see what happens. Okay? It would be a psych experiment. And that's how millions of men and women are living in today's day and age. It's like science fiction. So what I'm suggesting is that we actually go back to the traditional. Like, that's the cycles of history. So like, what's progressive is actually very traditional in many respects. And we make the institution of marriage, if we want to keep it, more humble, where we just like lower our expectations for what we need and want from our spouse, and get our needs met with other relationships, and bring back that flourishment of and diversity of relationships in people's lives. Hopefully that answers your question. Stephanie A., thank you for your support. Question, as a woman, what is the best way to outplay a trickster archetype man? Dealing with a player like him always takes me out of my frame. I get so defensive. So I assume when you're saying the trickster archetype, you mean that you're dealing with a player. And when you say a player, I'm assuming you mean a guy who just sort of wants to have sex with you and will say what he needs to say and will do what he needs to do to make that happen. And that's very attractive because generally players don't have qualms about telling women what they want to hear. And nothing works better on people than telling them what they want to hear. Okay? It's the most attractive, it's music to everyone's ears to hear exactly what you want to hear, right? And you might think, like a normal person with maybe more honest integrity won't just cater to that and will tell more of the truth. And that's not as seductive. That kind of like breaks the spell of the romance. And that's, despite what women and men say, not really what they want. A lot of men and women want to be seduced. If you're finding yourself having to deal with players a lot, there might be a part of you that likes to be tricked, that likes to be told what she wants to hear because it feels really good. The guys who tell you the truth, it's not as fun. It's honesty doesn't get you laid, but it's generally easier to be into a relationship with in the long run, right? So the way to, I wouldn't try to like out trick the trickster. That just is more trouble than it's worth. It's a better idea to not give players too much ammo. Like you got to think, how did this person know exactly what I wanted to hear? Well, in the vast majority of cases, you fucking told him exactly what you wanted to hear. And this guy just mirrored it back to you. Okay? So don't go, a lot of women, they think that they're like dating intentionally by coming right out of the gate and saying, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I respond to. On some level, that makes rational sense. They're just trying to kind of like accelerate the process, filter people out, etc. But all they're really doing on some level is giving the players better access to their vulnerabilities. And it's much easier. And now you have a problem because it's going to be harder for you to tell whether the man is telling you, when you hear what you want to hear, it's going to be harder for you to know whether the guy's a player and he's just doing it because he knows it will help him get laid, which it will, or that he's actually like compatible. He's honestly compatible with you. So it's a good idea not to spill your purse out too soon with anybody. And to kind of like give people a chance to show you who they are, as opposed to kind of like training them to know what you want to hear. Like some women make it so obvious from their dating profiles where they won't even talk to men. It's like, if you're this way, then swipe left. Get out of here. It's very easy to reverse engineer then what you want to hear. And I can pretend to be that if I'm a player for a couple hours in order to get what I want. So that's probably what I would recommend, is don't give too much information too soon, and to learn to disclose on par with trust. Okay. Tino Danielzik, thank you for your donation. How does your model presented in the book apply to people we consider as toxic, like narcissists or BPD people? Well, I think it still applies. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to have a relationship with a personality disordered individual. To have a peaceful, stable, harmonious relationship with a personality disordered individual, especially a cluster B. Like I talk about in, chapter 10? You can't have any relationship with anyone. You can only have certain relationships with certain people. And when you're really dealing with a narcissist, because I know that word gets used a lot these days, or a borderline, you can't have any type of relationship with them. You can have non-reciprocated relationships. You can have chaotic relationships. You can have on again, off again relationships. You can have abusive relationships. You can have addicted relationships. I mean, like those are the types of relationships you can have with personality disorder people. It's very frustrating, and everyone I think gets a pass because most people haven't dated somebody with a cluster B personality disorder. And when you haven't, you don't understand how absolutely crazy it can be. Like the shit that can happen in a relationship with a narcissist or a borderline, it's like you might think it only happens on a soap opera. But like it's like soap operas are tame compared to these relationships. And most people are unprepared for this like really crazy outlier, because in many respects they don't look crazy. In many respects, they're very attractive. What's really interesting, because I've researched both of these a lot, because I worked with personality disorder folks for several years. Fascinating subject. There's some evidence that suggests like there's 3 clusters of personality disorders, A, B, and C, and all of the disorders in a single cluster, they load on each other. So there's like overlap between them. They're unique expressions, but they also seem to have a very common base because they're often comorbidly diagnosed. And there's 4 in the cluster B, right? There's borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, and histrionic. Yeah. So some researchers have come to the conclusion that borderline and narcissism are actually the same disorder expressed through the lens of gender, which is interesting. Because if you look at the DSM definition of narcissism, which is really a grandiose type, which is not the only type, but it's like 5 times more likely that a man will have NPD than a woman. And if you look at the way that borderline is constructed in the DSM, it's like 5 times more likely that a woman will be diagnosed with BPD than a man. But there's some evidence research to suggest that both of these are the same underlying disorder, the same like really fractured and immature sense of self that then gets expressed in culturally sanctioned gendered expressions. We have to be careful though, because like narcissists and borderline folks, sometimes they like, why do so many people like have so much energy about it? It's because they can be so attractive and charming. Not all of them, but like a lot of them. And that's why people just like burn with this animosity around their disordered exes, right? Because they got their hopes up. Like this was this beautiful woman who seemed to be over the moon about you, and she made you feel like $1 million, that no man has ever fucked her like that before, that she's never loved somebody so much in her entire life. And that works on people, man. It's like, especially if you've had kind of like unsatisfying or lackluster relationships in the past, that's like, wow, finally it's working. Or, a narcissistic man can come in and he's super confident. He's like almost dangerous. He often is high achieving in corporate organizations. So you have to be a little Machiavellian to play the Game of Thrones in some respects. What I'm saying is that often narcissistic men and borderline women present as very attractive, like fantasy options. It's like, wow, finally, this tall, attractive, rich, confident, risky man who just like takes what he wants is showing interest in me. Wow, I can see how that would be seductive. So that's why people get into relationships with these folks, is because they see them as very high value. They present as having a lot of what they want. And of course, it doesn't last. And a lot of times people spend months or years like chasing the dragon. They're trying to chase that high that they felt in the first 2 or 3 months before, let's say, the curtain dropped and they found out who they were really dealing with. And it's very confusing because it's like, Well, I know that they can be loving and warm and kind and confident, and I really want to see that side of them again. And it can be very confusing and painful to be in relationships with those folks and to separate from those folks. But I don't think they're a special case. I still feel like they fit into the model, and that's why people get into relationships with those folks. Okay. Tiffany Longboat, thank you for your donation. Jamar, thank you for your donation. Hello, doctor. If you can give your 25-year-old self any piece of advice, what is the most important message you would want to get across? Oh, man. That is a great question. And I'm struggling because I don't know if my 25-year-old self would listen to me. Even if I stepped out of a time portal. Because like I would try to impart my words of wisdom to him, but like, how did I get the wisdom that I have? It's like I had to go through the shit. I had to make my own mistakes. I had to choose to live how I lived. And I don't know if I'm the type of person who can just listen to good advice that goes against what I might want to do in the present moment and prioritize the advice. Same thing. I mean, it was kind of the issue when I was younger. My dad gave me a lot of good advice, especially with respect to money, because he's worked in finance almost his entire career. But I wanted to be an actor, and I thought that money was kind of this crass, materialistic, at best necessity and at worst corruption, and that the real important things in life didn't have anything to do with money. And I was very idealistic, and I wanted to live a bohemian lifestyle, and that caused me to be very poor for most of my 20s. And I only started making money a bit later than some of my friends and colleagues. So like my lifetime earnings is probably lower. And now I know it's like my dad was giving me very good advice. I was just not ready to hear it. And I wasn't ready to hear it because I wasn't like done with my own foolishness on some level. Like pearls before swine, man. Like people have to be done with their foolishness. Otherwise, just save your breath. This is really important as a therapist. Like you'd be surprised. People pay me now a lot of money and they come to me asking for help, asking for advice. It's hard enough when people pay and ask for advice for them to follow it. It's not like people just do everything that I ask them or recommend of them. That's just not how people work. So if people who are paying and asking for advice still don't follow it, we should be very cautious about giving it where it's not asked for, because it's hard enough to get people to follow it when they do. Win December, cool name. Thanks for your donation. Is there a technique to become the captain instead of being pastor? Absolutely. That's what we talk about in the book. To become a captain, you need to do three things. You need to build a boat, you need to learn to sail, and you need to chart a course. That's how you go from being a passenger to a captain. Don't feel bad. Everyone starts out as a passenger because we all start out as children, and children can't really do anything under their own power. But there's a small proportion of humanity that eventually becomes sick of being a passenger and goes through the expense and risk and trial of becoming a captain. And they do this by building something to live in and to share with others, something good, something of value, by developing themselves, by becoming competent, by becoming masterful, and by having a mission and a purpose and an objective around which other people can rally. So that's how you become a captain. Mike S. Hey, Mike S. Thanks for your donation. We've talked in the past about meditation. What type do you recommend and why? I've done a lot of meditation in my life, like tens of thousands of hours, a lot. I was really interested in meditation starting from when I was a teenager. I even lived in a monastery for a while. And it was a big part of my life for a very long time. And there are different types of meditation. The most popular meditation right now is mindfulness meditation. I even wrote my dissertation on mindfulness and ran a randomized controlled trial about the effects of a brief mindfulness intervention on reading comprehension. So I'm really interested in mindfulness. That said, it's not like this panacea. It's not Robitussin. It's not good for everything. It's good for some things. I think in today's day and age, based on the problems that I see, we don't need as much mindfulness as we need concentration. There's so many attentional problems, and there's so many distractions in our lives. It's very hard for people to watch even an 8-minute long YouTube video these days. You know what I'm saying? How long can people actually focus? How long can people sit and in peace and repose? Like their lives are becoming anxious and agitated and restless and exhausted. And a lot of that is because of the dissipation of their attention, of their focus. David Goleman, the guy who wrote Emotional Intelligence, wrote a book called Focus, the Hidden Driver of Excellence. Not a great book, in my opinion, but the idea is a good one, which is like behind most successful people is the ability to focus intensely. And this is also how I work. It's like I structure my day so that I have chunks that I can focus on doing one thing. Like I always batch my consultations together, one after the other. So I just like bang them out. When I work on my writing, I set aside at least 3 hours to do that. And if I don't have a 3-hour chunk, I don't write. Because what I've noticed is that writing, it takes some time to kind of get into the flow state. And I kind of want to go deep into my thoughts. If I do 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, then the writing is kind of disjointed because I'm kind of thinking about and feeling different things on different days, and that might show. So it's a good idea to kind of like focus on, to create that in your daily routine so that you can focus deeply. So concentrational meditation, so this is important. Mindfulness meditation, you can't really fuck up, which is probably why it's very popular today. It's like, no matter what happens inside of you, as long as you like notice it, you did it. It's like I'm noticing that I'm thinking about becoming a bird and flying over the Grand Canyon. I'm thinking about the last time I went to a Grand Canyon. I heard a story about it snowing. That would be interesting to see the Grand Canyon when it was snowing. When was the last time I even saw snow? It's like I'm not mind wandering. I'm mindfully meditating. I'm mindfully attending to my wandering thoughts, right? Concentrational meditation, you can fuck up. It has a fail condition, which is you stop focusing on the thing you're supposed to be focusing on. The easiest one to do is just to focus on your breath. Is just to put all of your focus and attention on the breath entering your lungs and leaving your lungs. Sometimes it can be a point in space or a mandala, or it can be a mantra. You want to kind of keep it simple that you can maintain a consistent focus, either visually or introspectively. And then when you notice that your mind has wandered, which it absolutely will, you just sort of gently and without judgment bring it back to where it's supposed to be. And the more you do that, the more you can actually have this piercing, enduring concentration. One of my mutant abilities, I have incredible concentration. Like I can sit down and read a book without stopping, without looking up. And that's something that is not an accident. It's not something that I was just born with. It's something that I've trained over decades. But holy shit, do I get a lot of stuff done now because I can just focus and drill it out. So that's what I would recommend. Okay, Nikki, thank you for your donation. I appreciate your content and that it helps women as much as men. Thank you. I'm glad that you said that. Is there anyone your content is not for? I would say my content is for everyone, but not everyone is for my content. I don't talk about certain groups as much as others, right? Like sometimes people want to know more about my takes on gay relationships. And I've talked a little bit about that, but honestly, I don't really feel like, one, that's not my expertise. And I mean, do the gay population really want a straight guy telling them about how to be in a gay relationship? Like that might rankle me the wrong way. So sometimes folks kind of get a little offended at, let's say, my lack of diversity or my heteronormativity or my androcentrism. I heard that word recently. But that's what I know. And so I'm sort of speaking out of my personal experience and also my professional expertise, which tends to focus on intersexual, heterosexual dynamics. And I respect in same-sex relationships, for example, not everything I say will apply, but I do think that the core reasons why human beings enter into relationships with each other are fundamentally the same, are mostly the same, regardless of the genders of the folks involved. So I don't want my content to alienate. I don't want my content to be divisive or sensational or controversial. Trust me, it would be very easy to lean into all those things, and I would get 10 times many views if I did. But I'm kind of here for a long time, not a good time. I hope. And I don't see how I achieve my ultimate mission, which is to reduce unnecessary suffering in the world at the expense of some group of people. Like, that's just not how I want to live. So hopefully that answers your question. Kid Flash, thank you for your donation. Love the channel and the book. I've heard a lot of talk about how people with personality disorders should be avoided in dating. Does the same apply to mood disorders, specifically bipolar 2? I mean, kinda. Yeah, man, kinda. It's like, you have to understand that you can only have relationships, certain kinds of relationships with certain people. And if you're dating somebody with a mood disorder, whether it's bipolar 2 or let's say major depression, like at least moderate, I think you could probably work around a mild depression, but moderate to severe, I mean, this is extremely difficult. Like, for example, a depressed person, and depression is one of the components of bipolar 2, so that's why I'm talking about that. They can feel just like an emotional bucket with a hole in the bottom. Like, no matter how much love and support and encouragement you give this person, it just disappears out of the bottom. And it can be exhausting. And you definitely don't get the same level of reciprocity because the person is dealing with the depression or the bipolar. So it's like, you just have to be real with who you're dealing with. In the vast majority of cases, it just might be easier to find somebody else who isn't depressed or has a significant mental disorder. And trust me, there are a lot of people out there. And this is not to put down people who are struggling with mental disorders. It's like, I think that they can do what they need to do to heal and get over it. Just like, if I injure myself, maybe I shouldn't be playing tennis for 6 months while my injury heals. That doesn't mean like I'm a bad person, I'll never play tennis again, but maybe don't date, take care of this issue, and become like more available and a better partner, 6 months, 12 months down the road. It's okay. I mean, that's not going to be the end of the world. And, I'm interested in like easy going relationships. And when you're dealing with somebody with a mental disorder, whatever the disorder is, they all share one thing in common, which is they have a distorted perception. That it's like a funhouse mirror, that somehow reality isn't reflected back accurately. And that can range from being annoying to being absolutely infuriating or hopeless or crazy making. So it's just like, if you want to have an easygoing relationship, you should kind of find somebody who's emotionally stable, who's emotionally available, and is more or less securely attached. I mean, it's not rocket surgery. Okay. Jenny Duki, I hope I said that right. Thank you for your donation. Good day, Orion. I am a 26 female. If a man felt disrespected by an event happened during a dating phase, what can I do to get him committed for a marriage? Wow, that was a big jump. I mean, I don't want to pry, but that can mean lots of different things. Like, he could have felt disrespected because you didn't text him back as quickly as he would like, or because you slept with somebody else, So obviously one is going to be easier to overcome than the other. It's hard to get over stuff. And the earlier it's difficult, like, first impressions kind of matter. And certainly the first, let's say, 20 impressions matter. Like, by the time you've spent 20 hangouts with somebody, you have a fairly concrete, stable mental construct of that person that it would kind of take a lot to change. So if he, for whatever reason, associates you with being a disrespectful woman or a disrespectful partner, especially if it didn't, I don't even know if you're in a relationship with this guy right now, but if it just happened early in the courtship phase, it just might be easier to go find somebody and get off on the right foot with them, rather than like having to overcome this obstacle that for whatever reason is present in your relationship. How can I get him committed for a marriage? I talk about that in the book. So the best way for a woman to get married is the Netflix model. So lots of people have Netflix. Why? Do they force them to buy the membership before they even see the content? No, quite the opposite. They make it really easy to access the content. They say, we will give you a complete, full, free trial. Like nothing is off the menu. You have complete access to every single one of our shows and movies and whatnot. They want to give you this, like, they want to reduce the barriers to entry, and they want to create opportunities for their potential customer to become emotionally hooked. And that's the goal, is like within 3 months, they now kind of get used to this. They like it. They're using it. They find a show or two that they really like. They want to know what happens next. And then if you'd like to continue your Netflix subscription, we suggest that you go to $9.99 a month or whatever it is. So it's like, that's kind of the best way to do it. So many women, especially on the apps, man, they come right out and they're like, I'm looking for a long-term relationship. It's like, okay. I mean, that's nice. But like, I mean, do you really want to negotiate that explicitly? And trust me, when I've tried to meet a woman with that kind of explicit negotiation, they don't like it. Okay. So, you know, it costs nothing to want and it costs something to give. So it's like, it's nice that you might want that, but like, so what's in it for him, kind of a thing. You need to enchant him. You need to give him good value. You need to be the 3-month free trial where he gets access to everything. It's super easy going. There are no obstructions, and it's emotionally engaging. And then you threaten to take it away. That's what causes people to buy Netflix memberships. You can't put the stuff behind the paywall because Hulu offers the free trial and Peacock offers the free trial and Disney Plus, whatever. It's like, you can't put all the good stuff behind the paywall of commitment anymore because none of your competitors are doing that. So for better or for worse, this is just the standard practice in that industry. And it's kind of the same thing in the sexual marketplace these days. So you want to target the man that you give the good, free, full menu to very prudently. You don't just want to do that willy-nilly, which is sometimes people misinterpret what I say. That's not what I say. It's like women shouldn't just be throwing sex at every man. But if they find a really qualified lead, it's not the time to withhold. Let's put it that way. So target the right guy, become emotionally compelling. I actually have an episode coming out called How to Marry a Rich, Attractive Man. So, because that's what I get all the time in my consultations with women. So hopefully that'll answer your question more. Thank you, Jenny. Okay, here we go. And then looks like this will be the last one for now. And then I'll maybe wrap up and tell you some of my news for the future. I have some exciting updates. All right, LJ, thank you for your donation. I gifted the book to a few friends, and they all took issues with the moral issues in the last chapter. How would you respond to those issues? I read the book as having no real moral leaning, but as a set of observations. I wish I knew more about what the moral issues were. My best guess is that I kind of predict a continued destabilization of the institution of marriage, which is very troubling for certain parts of the population, right? But it's not like, the book is not morally prescriptive. It's not. Like, I think I mentioned this in the preface. It's like, I don't agree with everything. Like, let's put it this way. I don't like everything that I've come to. I don't like every one of my conclusions. It's like Charles Darwin didn't like his theory of evolution. He actually wrote on the origin of species and kept it in a locked drawer in his desk for 20 years because it troubled him so much. And he only published it when a colleague in another country published a very similar idea of natural selection and the evolution of species. He says, actually, I have this, maybe the time has come for this idea. And he unlocked the drawer, and Darwin got credit very graciously by his colleague, who actually literally published the book before Darwin, who had been sleeping on it for 20 years. So it's like, this is not morally prescribed. I'm not saying this is how it should be. I'm making a reasonable guess that this is how it will be. And that is value neutral. When I talk about how men fundamentally attempt to exchange resources for sexual opportunity and vice versa for women, this is not a moral prescription. I'm not saying this is what men and women should do. I'm saying I observe behavior, and this is what men and women do. They often pretend that they don't do that, which is often what rankles people morally. Is sometimes, there's a lot of self-righteousness in morality, and sometimes the truth is more complicated than the easy prescriptions of an ethical code where everything is kind of black and white. In reality, people are complex, relationships are a mixed bag and a trade-off, and nothing is all good or nothing is all bad under the sun. So that's the approach that I came to writing this book with. I'm not making moral judgments here, and I don't love all of the conclusions that I arrive at, but they do seem to be aligned with reality as best as I can see it. So that's what I would say. Yo, Orion, there's 2 super heats you missed above. Did I? Okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you for that. Thanks for that, man. Glad I caught that. Okay. Let me respond to these, and I think that might be, oh, there's more. Holy crap. Oh dear. All right, no more, no more questions. I'm going to respond to the ones that I got, and I'll probably be a little briefer. I didn't know that I had so many more of them. Oh my gosh. Geez Louise, guys. Okay, so, oh boy. Okay, I'm gonna try to be brief. Sorry about this. I had no idea I had such a log here. Okay, Expat X, COP. Don't know what that is, but $40,000. Wow. I'm gonna assume that's a lot of money. Thank you for your donation. Is a deal breaker if I'm losing a lot of sexual attraction to my long-term girlfriend of 2 years to move forward with marriage, even though everything else is good. Man, that's a tough one, and I have been in that situation before. This has to do with kind of the gig economy. Like, it's, to my mind, it's sad when one dimension of a relationship stops working that we throw the entire relationship out if the relationship provides so much good and value and benefit in our lives. So we should be cautious about doing that. If this is something that you've tried to negotiate but doesn't seem like you're going to get anywhere, I think it would be really hard for me personally to choose between like somebody that I loved and cared about and had a good relationship with and like my sexuality. That would be tough, because like the point of a monogamous sexual relationship is to have sex. Like that's what makes it a monogamous sexual relationship. I can care about somebody as a friend, but we don't have to be married, or we don't have to be sexual partners. Do you understand? So if you guys are both mature adults about this, you might approach some non-conventional arrangements. But of course, that requires some tact, some willingness to be flexible, and some people aren't going to be able to do that. And you're going to have to choose. And you have to also appreciate that every relationship is a trade-off. And if you were to leave this relationship, I'm not saying you should, but if you were, you'll meet somebody else. I guarantee that. And this person might really float your boat sexually, but might be more annoying or difficult to get along with, you know? So it's always going to be a trade-off. You can't, there is no perfect person, but there are some flaws or quirks that you can live with and others that you can't. And you really have to be honest with yourself about that, because some of those things that you either can or can't live with may not be what society or your family or your friends or your parents tell you you should or should not live with. You kind of have to make up your own mind about that. As a person with a very high libido, it would be hard for me. You know, somebody for whom sex isn't as important, maybe that's a great deal. So there's a few things to consider there. Okay, I got to keep going. Marriage causes divorce. Hey, man. Thanks for your donations. Oh, you got several. Oh, man. I'm going to have to bang them out real fast, though. What do you think of evolutionary psychology? I think it's great. It is often criticized as being speculation. Is all psychology ultimately evolutionary psychology? I don't think it's all evolutionary psychology, but obviously all psychology is based on a mind, which must have some sort of brain substrate, which was produced through billions of years of evolution. So like indirectly, all psychology rests on a biological basis, though exactly how it does is very mysterious, and we shouldn't pretend that we understand how that works. So in that sense, all psychology has an evolutionary basis because it's rooted in the mind, which is in somehow related to the brain. Is it speculation? I mean, yeah, we weren't there 2 billion years ago. But we also can, like ethnography is really good and a good correlate to evolutionary psychology because that examines how more indigenous people live in the Amazon rainforest or Papua New Guinea, because we can more or less presume that these are modern analogs to the way that humans lived in pre-agricultural societies. Something to consider. Why do women want men to be emotionally vulnerable? So they know when they should jump ship and mate switch or use vulnerability. Well, some women will do that. I call that weaponized intimacy. Some women want to know where your thumb screws are, like where your wounds are, so that they know kind of where to put their thumb in to get you to jump. Women might also want to know because, like the player in my previous response, they might want to know what you want to see and what you want to hear, because a lot of women want to be liked. They don't talk about that a lot these days, but a lot of women want men to like them, and they want to know how they can be liked more by the men they want to be liked more by. And obviously, the more they know about his emotions and his personality, his interests, the more that they can reflect back to him what he wants to see, which generally does make him like her more, though it can lead to consequences further down the road. Men, as per the Coolidge effect, seem to be genetically wired for sexual variety. I would agree. Are women genetically wired to acquire resources and good genes? Definitely good genes. Resources can vary significantly from culture to culture and across time. Like in pre-agricultural societies, resources like private property didn't really exist. So the resources would probably be more aligned with, maybe there was like flocks of sheep potentially for nomadic herding cultures, but the resources are probably more aligned with the good genes. It's like he was strong, so he can protect and hunt and get more meat, things like that. Who is worst? Oh boy, the narcissist who has a mental illness? Well, the narcissism is mental illness, or the person who keeps falling in love with narcissists and the fantasies they sell. Well, they both kind of have an issue. So it's like, this is something to keep in mind, is that normal, emotionally healed, securely attached people generally don't get into catastrophic relationships with narcissists because something early on doesn't smell right. It doesn't pass the sniff test, or there's a little bit of disrespect, or there's something that's off, and they just say, you know what, I'm going to have to go with my gut here, and I'm out of here. They are less susceptible to toxic personalities. The folks who seem to keep getting involved with toxic people have some form of complementary wound that leaves them vulnerable and susceptible to exploitation. And I'm not saying that they deserved their abuse or their exploitation or victimization, but if they just think that they're the unlikely victims of bad people, I'm not sure how they're going to keep themselves safe and make better decisions moving forward. So there's something in them that like I talked about, the love bombing that's often associated with early stage courtship with borderline folks is, I mean, who's going to be susceptible? Somebody who didn't have enough love in his life, you know, a woman who has never been made to feel beautiful. You know, that's a wound, that's a need that a toxic exploitative person can actually very easily exploit. Okay, James Francis, $20, thank you. Thoughts on parenthood? How do you tell if a long-term partner might be a good co-parent as well? Vetting for a co-parent is very different from vetting for a playmate or just like a travel partner or just casual dating. When it comes to parenthood, I mean, everyone's going to be different, right? But I think that it makes sense to prioritize the attributes that have most to do with child care. So if you're James, I assume you're a man, so like you are probably vetting for a woman. Like, does she want kids? Does she like kids? Is she kind? Is she patient? Is she loving? Is she like emotionally stable herself? Is she emotionally available? Kids are very, very demanding. And if a woman is already kind of like not really available to you for whatever reason, it's going to be hard to be available to the children, right? And so those are some of the things that I would do. And of course, you need to feel like you need to trust them. This person, you're going to be dealing with some very precious, delicate goods, and you're not going to be everywhere at once. And so you really need to be able to trust this other person, their competence and their just like their logistical commitment on some level. Do they show up when they say they're going to show up? Do they do the things they say they're going to do? Do they not do the things they don't say they're going to? Do they say they're not going to do, etc.? Hope that helps. Chicago Chano, thank you for your donation. Is your book just a basis for dating in the US, or can it expound internationally? I'm moving abroad next year. Yeah, I think it's international. Certainly in more westernized cultures than in more traditional cultures, but in every part of the world, as far as I can tell, traditional cultures are moving in the direction of modern Western relationships. So I don't think it's just based in the US. In fact, I've done a number of consultations with folks in Saudi Arabia, and they say that it's just feminism everywhere there, and the women want to be modern and liberated, and it's just like America, according to the men that I've conversed with. Caesar Price, $20. Thank you, sir. Hello, Riz Lord. Oh, make me blush. I find the Adorer to be the best for me when I implemented your advice. Okay. I stopped focusing on women that look good and just focus on the ones that want me. It pretty much take it or leave it mindset. Yeah, take it or leave it is a really compelling sales attitude. Like, it's the sense that like you're interested but not too interested actually creates the conditions to be won. And that's part of the game of dating and seduction. There's a conquest. We think that it's men that always conquer women, but women conquer men all the time, probably more often, to be honest. And we can't conquer somebody that just surrenders. And we just surrender when we say, oh man, I really like you. I've never met anybody like you. I want to date you. I want to be in a relationship. Like, that's just, there's no siege. There's no conquest. There's no glory. There's nothing to be gained. So like the take it or leave it creates the conditions to be, there's like win conditions now, and potentially lose conditions, which also heighten the sense of risk or danger and motivate action. Diego Tapia, Dr. Taraban, chapter 9 is fascinating. Oh yeah, I love that one. That's my favorite chapter. That's one about love. What key sources did you use for love and romance historical analysis? Did you explore other cultural perspectives beyond the Western and medieval context? Great work. In the book, in the footnote, I talk about the two primary sources that I used for my analysis of romantic love. So if you listen on the audiobook, maybe you didn't know that. So those two sources are Denis de Rougemont's Love in the Western World, which is a very, in my opinion, well-researched academic dissertation on the literary and historical origins of romance. And the book We by the psychoanalyst Robert Johnson, which examines the myth of Tristan and Isolde through the lens of like a Jungian analysis, which lays bare the kind of psychological truths that exist at the heart of that myth. So granted, those are both Western sources, but I think my argument is the idea of romance as we understand it, it is kind of Western, and it did get more or less exported around the world. And cultures that have less contact with especially Christian traditions, including Islamic traditions, which, you know, it's kind of an evolution in their teachings of Christianity. They don't have that same idea. You go to India, you go to Southeast Asia. It's not saturated with romance. It's more saturated, especially in East Asia, with Confucianism, which has more to do with like practicality and maintaining harmony in relationships, as opposed to like this sort of like spiritual, righteous destiny kind of a thing. I don't know if that was the right word to say. Okay, promo MVMV. Thank you for your donation. I've been with my girlfriend for 10 years. She has gained 20 pounds since I met her. Okay, I can't enjoy sex with her, and I've tried everything, but nothing works. I really love her, but I'm tired and I don't know what to do. Well, there's a few ways you can approach that. First, I would encourage you to, if hopefully you're keeping care of yourself and you're working out and you're not overweight yourself, and invite her along with you. Invite her to go for a run. Get her a gym membership. Say it's something that you can do together. Frame it as something that's good for your health. Have it be something that you can do as a couple, and invite her into that part of your life. Hopefully it will take. At a certain point, though, if it is a deal breaker, I would suggest that you are honest. And the way to have difficult conversations with anyone is to state the obvious emotional consequence of the behavior. Like, for example, if somebody's late all the time or they're flaky, the natural emotional consequence is that you don't trust that they're going to show up when they say they're going to show up. Like, duh. Obviously, that is what is going to come up in the people when you break plans at the last minute and you're 30 minutes late, etc. So you just sit down and be like, hey, you know, I just want you, you're my friend. I just want you to know that, like, I'm noticing I'm hesitating making more plans with you, because in the past, like, half the time you cancel the plans at the last minute. And so I kind of feel like I can't really trust whether you're going to keep the plans. It's like, yeah, no shit. So, like, is this something that we can potentially discuss? Because, like, I don't want to feel like a schmuck, which is what I do when you cancel plans at the last minute. And it makes me not want to make more plans with you. So it's like, I don't know, do you not want to make plans with me? Is this, did I not get the message? And you kind of make it explicit, and you don't like say you should keep your word, or I can't believe that you would be so selfish to do that. It's all about you. Like, there's nothing to argue about, because I'm talking about how I feel, and it's what anyone would feel. So that's what I would be in that situation. It's like, hey, sweetie, I love you and I care about you, and I got to be real with you. I'm not as sexually attracted to you as I used to. And I think it's because you put on all this weight, and I'm struggling here. I don't know what to do, because I care about you, but, like, I miss this dimension of our relationship, and it's kind of important to me. And I've noticed that I'm, like, paying more attention to other women. Like, my eyes are straying. Like, duh, that's the natural human consequence. If you start to lose sexual attraction for your partner, you start to become more sexually interested in other people. And it's like, that might be the thing. It's like, oh yeah, okay, this is actually, there's a consequence to this kind of a thing. And do I want to maintain my partner's attraction? I might have to choose between, the life of comfort that facilitates the weight gain and the relationship, and then allow her to choose. Crescendo, 1994. What is the best place to find sexually conservative, socio-sexually restricted women when you aren't religious for something long-term marriage? If you aren't, well, religion would be the best one. Other than that, I would say more like small town. The cities, it's very hard to have a conservative upbringing in a major city. In small towns and in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, they're going to have more conservative values. To be honest, they're probably going to be wrapped up in religiosity in most cases as well. But that's where those folks tend to live. Now, of course, it's hard to go there because there's fewer people, so they have a smaller pool, which is why those folks, the young ones anyway, tend to migrate into the cities, where they often get corrupted by the city influence over time. But fortunately, with the international social media apps and everyone's just in one big pond these days, you can target folks geographically via social media. So that would be my suggestion. Tiffany Longby, question for humble pittance. How do you keep Grandpa Mouse satiated and valued? I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Is Grandpa Mouse, are you like an older woman and Grandpa Mouse is your husband? I assume that's what you're saying. Satiated and valued. Well, let me tell you, the best hack, I gave this to a woman just today, especially to make an older man feel valued, is to ask his advice. Like, ask him for help. Give him an opportunity to solve one of your problems or to demonstrate that he knows something about this and can teach you something. Like, make him feel like his competence and his experience are worthwhile by creating an opportunity for him to demonstrate it. Okay, Neutrino Surfers, thank you for your donation. Hello, sir. Could you elaborate on how you fixed your attention to toxic people? Despite my efforts, I've been with 3 relationships in a row with women struggling with addiction, personality disorders. Yeah, so if it's 3 in a row, like I was saying earlier, you might have to look inside and be like, well, what unhealed complementary wounding inside of me is leading me to get into relationships with these types of women? I had that. I talk about that on the channel. When I was younger, I seemed to have like a radar that could sense the roller coasters, the really dramatic, high passion, but ultimately chaotic and destructive women. And I had to come to the conclusion, it wasn't just that women were crazy. There was a craziness inside of me that I had to like address and heal so that my attraction organically began to shift. And as I started to heal that wound, it didn't happen right away. It took about 2 years. And I slowly went from being attracted to a certain type of woman to being attracted to stable, emotionally available, securely attached women. But 2 years ago, I'd have to pretend to be attracted to those types of women. You know what I'm saying? Like I could choose to be with them, but I was like always leaning over here. So if you find yourself over and over again in toxic relationships, you have to look, you're the common denominator, dude. And that's good because that you might be able to look inside and find something to learn about yourself and about what you're doing to attract these women or stay in those relationships once the red flags become apparent, to keep yourself safe in the future. I know you can do it, man. Okay, just a couple more. Thank you for your patience. Ace7X, thank you for donation. Orion, you should travel to Dubai and go on Mike Thurston's podcast. Don't know who that is, but I am interested about Dubai because it just seems like such a wild place to test some of my theories. Also, sorry if someone asked this already, but will you write another book? If so, on what? Funny you should ask that. I am going to be making an announcement very soon. Let me just get through these other questions and I'll table this to the end. Byron Injili, thank you for your donation. One of my key takeaways from the book was that you can either have more power in a relationship or be more in love. Is this a fair conclusion? Kinda. Yeah, it's like everything has a cost. And one of the costs of being in love is control. Like, love is a roller coaster, man. It's full of loop-de-loops and dizzying highs and terrifying lows. It's a thrill ride. You can't be on a roller coaster and drive the roller coaster at the same time. Like, you get taken for a ride on a roller coaster. You strap yourself in, you surrender control, and somebody else drives it. That's what makes it a thrill ride. If you were controlling it, it wouldn't be nearly as thrilling. So one of the costs of being in love, that limerence, is control. And generally the one with more power has more control in the relationship. So I would agree. LJ. I talked about that one. Oh, is that everything? Excellent. Thank you. So no more questions because I don't want to drag this on too long. It's already been an hour and a half. So thank you so much. Those were excellent questions today. It also came out pretty good. I hope that was interesting to you. So as I said, I have a couple of updates for you about the future of the channel and also the things that I'm going to be working on. I have two big projects that I'm going to turn my attention to starting next week, actually. The first is that I hope to launch a members-only community very soon. In fact, I hope to get it up and running starting in November. And I'm very excited at the prospect of what this community might be able to offer. I'm calling it the Captain's Quarters, to use the metaphor of the captain from my book and that we discussed in today's live cast. So the Captain's Quarters will be my members-only community. And there's going to be a number of benefits associated with that. So besides access to an interactive community of like-minded, growth-oriented individuals, you'll get a lot more access to me. So there will be bi-monthly, twice a month, group consultation calls. Not quite like this. In this kind of call, you just see and hear me, right? And we see the chat on the side. In these calls, it's going to be two-way. I'm going to see you. You're going to be able to talk. And we're going to be able to have more of a dialogue together. And they're going to be, I think, an hour and a half long, twice a month, which is going to be super cool. I'm excited about that because these chats have been so much fun. I'm also going to bring back guests like I did on my channel. Having the long form content was bad for the algorithm, so I stopped doing it. But I would love to continue to have discussions with interesting people and to give the members an opportunity to ask them questions and pick their brains for their experience and expertise. So they'll have access to that kind of exclusive content. And some other things like discounts on one-on-one consultations and things like that. So there's obviously a lot that I have to do to kind of get that up and running. I have to build the platform, but that's what we are looking at for the foreseeable future. So that's exciting thing number one. Exciting thing number two is I am starting my next book. I couldn't stay away, apparently. It hasn't even been 3 months since the publication of The Value of Others, and I'm already itching to get started on the next one. I have an idea. It's gonna be a very different book. So like I said, this was sort of like my flagship book. I hope it's relevant 100 years from now. It's my best possible argument for kind of some high-level concepts. The book I'm imagining is going to be half as long and is going to be more accessible and more aspirational. It's going to be less about the nitty-gritty economics of relationships and more about how to become a captain. So it's going to be, again, using that metaphor and expanding on that in a way that hopefully all people can resonate with. So I'm really excited about that. I can't wait to get started. And I hope to have more updates for you on both of those on this channel in the coming weeks. So that's what I got for you. Looks like there was another one here. Antonio Nutrition, just to thank you because you're awesome and genuine. Please do sit down with Dr. Jordan Peterson one day. I'd love to. Would be amazing. Thank you for your thoughtful intellect. Oh yeah, I'd love to talk to Jordan Peterson. I've noticed that it doesn't really work when I invite myself on people's channels, and I'm sure this is no exception. So if you do want to see a conversation between me and Dr. Peterson or anybody else, the best thing to do to support that happening is to reach out to those platforms and say, hey, I'd really like you to interview this guy if you haven't heard about him, and so that their team can extend an invitation to me. That's generally how this happens. Inviting yourself in the podcast world goes about as well as inviting yourself to somebody else's birthday party. It's like, don't go if you're not invited. I am confident that more invitations are going to be coming in. I have several more appearances lined up for Q4. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was interesting for you guys. And please stay tuned for updates about the community and the book. All right, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.